Elias Vatanen had built an empire on precision and control, but when he pushed open that conference room door in his Helsinki headquarters, he found the one thing his billions couldn't prepare him for: a woman caught between vulnerability and fury, and the sudden, terrifying realization that his carefully constructed world had just shattered in a single heartbeat. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more thrilling stories, turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update, and sit back, relax, and enjoy this captivating tale. The February wind howled against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vatanen Industries' executive suite, 40 stories above Helsinki's frozen harbor. Elias Vatanen stood motionless before the glass, watching snow devils dance across the Baltic ice, his reflection a study in Nordic composure, sharp cheekbones, ash-blonde hair precisely cut, eyes the color of Finnish winter, cold, clear, impenetrable. At 36, he'd conquered everything he'd touched. The tech empire he'd built from a university dorm room now employed 15,000 people across Scandinavia. Forbes called him the Ice King of innovation. Business Insider praised his calculated brilliance. What they didn't write about was the silence of his penthouse apartment, the untouched piano in the corner, the way he sometimes stood at windows like this and felt nothing, absolutely nothing, except the weight of his own success. "Sir, the acquisition team is ready in conference room B," his assistant Julie announced from the doorway, her voice carrying the efficiency he demanded from everyone around him. Elias checked his Patek Philippe, 2:47 p.m. 13 minutes early. Punctuality was weakness disguised as virtue. He believed in arriving exactly on time, not a second before or after. It communicated control. "I'll be there at 3, he said without turning. Julie hesitated. In 5 years of working for him, she'd learned to read the subtle shifts in his shoulders, the nearly imperceptible tightening of his jaw. "Sir, I should mention, there's been a last-minute addition to the consulting team. The analysis specialist from our Tampere office. She arrived early and asked to review the presentation materials before." Name: Aino Lotti. The name meant nothing to him. Elias made it his business to know key players, and if this Aino Lotti wasn't on his radar, she wasn't key. Probably some mid-level analyst trying to make an impression. He'd seen dozens of them, ambitious, hungry, believing that one brilliant presentation would catch his attention. They never did. What do you think makes someone truly unforgettable? Drop your thoughts below. "Fine," he said dismissively. "Send the preliminary reports to my tablet." Julie disappeared, her heels clicking a retreat down the marble corridor. Elias remained at the window another moment, watching the grey sky bleed into greyer sea. Stockholm tomorrow. Berlin on Thursday. His life was a rotation of cities and conference rooms, airports and hotels that all looked the same. Somewhere in the blur of the past decade, he'd stopped noticing the difference between Tuesday and Saturday, between Helsinki and Hamburg. His phone buzzed, his mother, calling from Rovaniemi for the 3rd time this week. He declined it. She wanted him to come north for midsummer, to remember what matters, her code for finding a nice Finnish girl and producing grandchildren. As if he could pencil love between a merger and a product launch. At 2:59, Elias straightened his Tom Ford tie, midnight blue, like everything he wore, a uniform that eliminated decision-making, and headed toward conference room B. The corridor was silent except for his footsteps. Vatanen Industries occupied the entire top floor, a kingdom of glass and steel and obsessive minimalism. He designed it himself. No warm woods, no cozy corners, nothing that invited lingering or personal attachment. This was a place for work, for achievement, for the relentless forward motion that had defined his entire adult life. Conference room B sat at the corridor's end, its frosted glass door closed. Through the translucent surface, he could see movement, someone inside, probably this Aino Lotti, rehearsing her moment of career glory. Elias didn't knock. It was his building, his company, his room. He simply pushed the door open, already forming the polite but distant greeting he'd perfected for lesser employees. What happened next occurred in the space between heartbeats. The woman stood beside the presentation screen, her back to the door, caught in the vulnerable act of changing her blouse. She'd already removed the traveling sweater, he glimpsed it draped over a chair, and was pulling a crisp white shirt over her shoulders. The motion had lifted her undershirt, exposing a slice of pale skin and the elegant curve of her spine. But it wasn't the accidental intimacy that stopped him. It was the moment she turned. Her eyes, startlingly green against dark lashes, went wide with shock. One arm was still caught in the shirt sleeve, her hair, a cascade of honey brown, was partially obscuring her face. She froze, and in that frozen moment, Elias experienced something he'd never felt in his precisely calculated life. The world tilted. Not metaphorically. Actually tilted, as if the floor had become uncertain beneath his handmade Italian shoes. Those green eyes held him suspended in a moment that seemed to stretch and contract simultaneously. He saw surprise transform into horror, horror flash into anger, but underneath it all, something else. A spark. Recognition. As if some part of her felt it too, the sudden, inexplicable gravity between two strangers. Get out. Her voice cracked like a whip, shattering the spell. Elias should have moved. Every instinct honed by years of crisis management and boardroom combat screamed at him to retreat, apologize, close the door. But his body had become a traitor to logic. He stood paralyzed in the doorway, drinking in details his analytical mind couldn't help but catalogue. The way her fingers clutched the half-worn shirt against her chest, protective but defiant, not cowering. The flush creeping up her neck, spreading across her cheekbones like watercolor on snow. The slight tremor in her shoulders that could have been anger or adrenaline or both. She was beautiful, yes, but Helsinki was full of beautiful women, and none of them had ever made his carefully controlled pulse stutter like a broken engine. It was something else. Something in the tilt of her chin, the fire in those impossible eyes, the way she refused to look away even as mortification painted her face crimson. I said get out. Aino's voice rose, sharper now, and the sound finally broke through his paralysis. Elias began, then stopped. What could he possibly say? In 36 years, he'd never been at a loss for words. He'd negotiated billion-euro deals, stared down hostile boards, delivered keynote speeches to thousands. But standing in this doorway, watching this woman struggle to maintain dignity while clearly wanting to disappear into the floor, every eloquent phrase evaporated. Close the door, she commanded, and something in her tone, not pleading but commanding, as if she had every right to order him around in his own building, made him obey. He stepped backward into the corridor and pulled the door shut, his hand trembling slightly on the handle. Through the frosted glass, he could see her silhouette moving, hurriedly finishing dressing. His heart hammered against his ribs with an intensity that felt almost medical. Was this what a heart attack felt like? Some kind of cardiac event brought on by, what? Accidentally seeing a woman change her shirt? No. It wasn't the exposed skin, though he'd be lying if he claimed he hadn't noticed the elegant lines of her shoulders, the delicate strength in her frame. It was the eye contact. That single moment when their gazes locked and something passed between them, recognition, electricity, fate, whatever poets and fools called it when the universe reshuffled itself around two people. Ridiculous, Elias muttered to himself, pressing his palm against his forehead. He was a man of science and systems, not superstition. Love at first sight was a marketing concept, a Disney trope, a neurological trick of dopamine and oxytocin that fooled simple minds into confusing attraction for connection. Except his hands were still shaking. The door opened with deliberate force, and there she stood, fully dressed now in a crisp white blouse tucked into charcoal slacks, her hair hastily pulled back into a professional knot. But her eyes. God, those eyes were volcanic. You must be Elias Vatanen, she said, her Finnish accent carrying the musical lilt of someone from the lake regions, probably Tampere as Tully had mentioned. I've heard you're many things. Brilliant, ruthless, efficient. I hadn't heard that you were rude enough to enter a room without knocking. The rebuke landed like a slap, and perversely, it made his pulse race faster. When was the last time anyone had spoken to him like that? His board members deferred. His employees cowered. Even his mother had learned to soften her criticisms with humor. But this woman, this Aino Lotti, stood in front of him with shoulders squared and jaw set, treating him not like a billionaire CEO but like an ordinary man who'd committed an ordinary offense. It was the most intoxicating thing he'd ever experienced. I apologize, he managed, and was surprised to find he meant it. I didn't think I should have knocked. This is inexcusable. Something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, that he hadn't made excuses or blamed her for changing in a conference room. She studied him for a long moment, and Elias had the unsettling sensation of being truly seen, not as the Ice King of innovation or the Vatanen heir, but as a man who just made a clumsy, human mistake. The bathroom on this floor is being renovated, Aino said finally, her voice losing a fraction of its edge. Your assistant told me I could use this room to freshen up before the meeting. I had coffee spilled on me during the train ride from Tampere, and I didn't want to present smelling like a cafe. Of course, Elias said, though his brain was only half processing her words. The other half was occupied with the completely unprofessional observation that she had a small scar above her left eyebrow, barely visible, and he wanted to know the story behind it. Again, I'm sorry. The apology felt inadequate, microscopic compared to what had just transpired. He wanted to say something else, something that would erase the humiliation from her expression, but his legendary eloquence had apparently abandoned him in favor of single-syllable words and stammering. Aino glanced at the slim watch on her wrist. Simple, practical, not trying to impress anyone. The meeting starts in 3 minutes. Should we just pretend this didn't happen? Yes, Elias said too quickly, then corrected himself. I mean, if that's what you'd prefer. I want you to know that this won't affect my presentation. She raised an eyebrow, and he caught the steel underneath her embarrassment. Good. Because I've spent 2 months on this analysis, and I'm not letting an awkward moment derail it. Even if that awkward moment involves Helsinki's most powerful CEO seeing me half-dressed. The bluntness of it, the refusal to dance around what had happened, struck him as simultaneously mortifying and magnificent. Most people in her position would have dissolved into apologies or tried to weaponize the incident, threaten a harassment claim, seek leverage. But Aino simply named the reality and moved forward. He found himself smiling before he could stop it, a real smile, not the calculated expression he deployed at press conferences. You're very direct. It's a Finnish trait, she replied, but the corners of her mouth twitched, almost forming a smile of her own. We don't waste time on nonsense. No, Elias agreed, still smiling like an idiot. We don't. For a suspended moment, they stood in the corridor, neither moving toward the conference room nor away from each other. The building's heating system hummed through the walls. Somewhere distant, a phone rang and went unanswered. Through the windows at the corridor's end, Helsinki spread out beneath them, grey and beautiful and cold. Elias noticed details he had no business noticing, the way she'd missed a button on her shirt in her haste, leaving a tiny gap near her collarbone. The faint scent of her perfume, something subtle, maybe birch and wildflower, nothing like the heavy designer fragrances that usually filled his meetings. The way she stood with her weight slightly on her left foot, as if ready to bolt or fight, he couldn't tell which. Mr. Vatanen, she said softly, and the formality felt wrong now, like putting on a stranger's coat. The meeting. Right. Yes. He stepped aside, gesturing for her to precede him. After you, Ms. Lottie. She moved past him, careful to maintain distance, but in the narrow corridor, her shoulder still brushed his arm. The contact lasted less than a second, barely qualified as touch, but Elias felt it like electricity, sharp, bright, impossible to ignore. Have you ever had a moment that changed everything in an instant? Tell us your story in the comments. Before we continue, don't forget to smash that like button if you're enjoying what you're seeing. Your support means the world to me and helps this channel grow. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our uploads. We're building an amazing community here, and I don't want you to miss out on what's coming. And please, share this video with your friends, family, or anyone who would love this type of content. The more people we can bring into this community, the better it gets for everyone. Your engagement in the comments has been incredible, and I love reading every single one of your thoughts and theories. Keep them coming. Now, let's go in depth into the story. They entered conference room B together, and Elias immediately noticed the other attendees had arrived. Mikko from finance, pale and nervous as always. Sana from legal, sharp-eyed and observing everything. Yuka from operations, checking his phone with barely concealed boredom. All of them looked up as Elias and Aino entered, and he could see the calculation in their eyes. Why was the CEO arriving with the unknown analyst from Tampere? Why did they both look slightly flushed? Apologies for the delay, Elias said smoothly, sliding into his default mode, command, control, corporate efficiency. He took his seat at the table's head, and Aino moved to the presentation station, connecting her laptop with practiced ease. Let's begin. Ms. Lottie, you have the floor. She nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard, and the screen behind her illuminated with graphs and data visualizations. When she turned to face the room, all traces of the flustered woman from moments ago had vanished. In her place stood a confident professional, shoulders back, voice steady. Thank you all for your time, Aino began. Over the past 2 months, I've been analyzing the proposed acquisition of Nordic Solutions, specifically examining market integration risks that weren't addressed in the preliminary reports. Elias tried to focus on her words. He genuinely did. This acquisition represented 2 years of strategy, hundreds of millions in capital, the potential to dominate the Nordic tech sector. It mattered. It was important. But he couldn't stop watching the way she moved as she spoke, confident and precise, using her hands to emphasize points. Couldn't stop noticing how her eyes lit up when she discussed data architecture, how passion crept into her voice when she identified a critical flaw in the due diligence process. This wasn't someone performing to impress him. This was someone who genuinely cared about the work, who'd spent nights digging through spreadsheets because she believed in finding truth, not telling powerful people what they wanted to hear. Which brings me to the primary concern, Aino was saying, advancing to a new slide. The integration timeline assumes a seamless merger of company cultures, but Nordic operates on a fundamentally different management philosophy. They prioritize flat hierarchies and consensus-based decision-making, while Vatanen Industries, she paused, her gaze flicking to Elias for just a fraction of a second, operates with clear vertical authority structures. Mikko leaned forward. Are you suggesting the acquisition is flawed? I'm suggesting, Aino replied calmly, that proceeding without addressing these cultural incompatibilities will result in a 30 to 40% attrition rate within the first year, concentrated among Nordic's most innovative employees, the very people we're acquiring the company to retain. The room fell silent. Elias felt something shift in his chest, recognition of a different kind now. She was brilliant. Not just competent or thorough, but genuinely, intimidatingly brilliant. And she was presenting research that contradicted 2 years of his strategy, standing in front of senior executives who could make or break her career, showing no fear. Beautiful and brilliant and brave. He was in serious trouble. What do you propose? Elias heard himself ask, his voice rougher than intended. Aino met his eyes, and for a heartbeat, the conference room disappeared, the executives, the charts, the €1 billion deal. It was just the two of them, held in the gravity of that earlier moment, the accidental intimacy that had rewritten something fundamental in both their universes. A phased integration, she said, her voice soft but steady. 6 months of parallel operations, joint team-building initiatives, transparent communication about structural changes. It'll cost more upfront, but the retention rates will justify the investment. That delays our market consolidation by 2 quarters, Yuka objected. It ensures we actually have a company to consolidate, Aino countered. Elias should have been annoyed. He'd built his empire on speed and decisive action, not cautious delays and hand-holding. But watching Aino stand her ground, defending her analysis against resistance, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: respect. Pure, uncomplicated respect for someone who valued being right over being liked. Send me the full report, he said abruptly, cutting off Yuka's brewing argument. All of it, every data point, every projection. I want it on my desk by tomorrow morning. Aino blinked, surprised. You're taking this seriously. You spent 2 months researching what my acquisition team spent 2 years planning, Elias replied. Either you're recklessly arrogant or you found something they missed. Either way, I want to know. A smile, small, genuine, broke across her face, and Elias felt his chest tighten. God, what was happening to him? He didn't believe in destiny or soulmates or any of the romantic nonsense people use to explain chemical attraction. But sitting in this conference room, watching this woman smile because he'd validated her work, Elias Vatanen felt the foundation of his carefully constructed cynicism begin to crack. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, but Elias barely tracked it. He made appropriate comments, asked relevant questions, played the role of engaged CEO. But his mind kept drifting back to the moment in the doorway, the vulnerability in her eyes, the strength in her voice, the way the world had tilted on its axis. When the meeting finally ended, the executives filed out, Mikko and Sana already debating the implications of Aino's analysis. Elias remained seated, pretending to review notes on his tablet, watching from the corner of his eye as Aino packed her laptop. She paused at the door, her hand on the frame, and turned back. They were alone again, the room suddenly too small and too large simultaneously. Thank you, she said quietly, for listening, for not dismissing the research because of what happened earlier. Your work has nothing to do with that, Elias replied, standing slowly. You're good at what you do. Very good. So are you, Aino said, then seemed to catch herself. I mean, obviously you are. You built this company from nothing. Everyone in Finland knows the story. Everyone thinks they know the story, Elias corrected gently. Success looks different from the inside. She studied him, that same penetrating gaze that made him feel transparent. Lonelier, you mean? The observation landed with unexpected accuracy, and Elias found himself without a clever deflection. Yes, he admitted. Lonelier. Aino nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd suspected. Well, thank you anyway. For today. For being decent. About an indecent situation. She left before he could respond, her footsteps fading down the corridor. Elias stood alone in conference room B, surrounded by the trappings of his success, the expensive furniture, the state-of-the-art presentation technology, the view of his conquered city, and felt the silence press against him like physical weight. His phone buzzed. His mother again. This time, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he answered. "It," he said softly. "Elias." Finally. His mother's voice carried the warmth of Lapland summers, bright and surprising. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten how to use a phone. How is my son? Still conquering the world?" "Something like that," Elias replied, moving to the window. Below, Helsinki bustled with afternoon life, commuters hurrying through snow, tourists snapping photos of the harbor, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Somewhere down there, Aino Lotti was probably catching a train back to Tampere, back to her own life, one that had briefly, accidentally intersected with his. "You sound strange," his mother observed. "Different. What happened?" "Nothing," Elias said automatically, then stopped. "Actually, I met someone." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Then, Elias Vatanen, are you telling me that my son, who hasn't expressed interest in anything but quarterly reports for 5 years, met someone? A woman someone?" "It's not. It's complicated." "All good things are," his mother replied, and he could hear her smiling. "Tell me about her." And standing in that conference room, with Helsinki spread below and February snow beginning to fall, Elias Vatanen did something he hadn't done in years. He told his mother the truth. The train back to Tampere departed at 5:47 p.m., and Aino claimed a window seat in the quiet car, desperate for silence after the chaos of the day. As Helsinki's lights began to recede, replaced by the dark forests and frozen lakes of the Finnish countryside, she pressed her forehead against the cold glass and tried to stop her hands from shaking. What had she done? She'd yelled at Elias Vatanen. The Elias Vatanen. The man whose company employed half of Finland's tech sector, whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations, whose approval could make or break careers with a single word. She'd stood in his corridor and called him rude, treated him like an ordinary man who'd made an ordinary mistake. Except he wasn't ordinary. And neither was what had happened between them. Aino closed her eyes, but that only made it worse, because then she could see it again with perfect clarity. The moment the door had opened. The shock in his eyes, not just surprise but something deeper, something that had mirrored her own sudden, inexplicable vertigo. She'd been caught vulnerable, half-dressed, completely exposed. But in the heartbeat before embarrassment crashed over her, she'd felt something else entirely. Recognition. As if some part of her soul had looked at Elias Vatanen and whispered, "There you are. I've been waiting." "Ridiculous," Aino muttered, earning a glance from the businessman across the aisle. She ignored him, pulling her laptop from her bag with more force than necessary. She had work to do, the full report Elias had demanded, complete with every citation and projection and contingency analysis. That's what mattered. Not the way his voice had roughened when he'd asked her questions during the presentation. Not the smile that had transformed his face from handsome to devastating. Not the admission of loneliness that had stripped away every layer of billionaire armor. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend, Lisa. "How did it go? Are you Helsinki's newest tech star, or should I start planning your funeral?" Aino smiled despite herself and typed back, "Somewhere in between. I'll tell you over wine." Another buzz, but this time from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, probably spam, but something made her open the message. "Ms. Lotti, this is Elias Vatanen. I hope you don't mind that I obtained your number from HR. I wanted to apologize again for this afternoon, and to let you know that I've cleared my schedule tomorrow morning to review your report in detail. If you're willing, I'd like to discuss your findings over breakfast. 8 a.m. at Cafe Engel in central Helsinki. Please let me know if this works for you. EV. Aino stared at the message until the words blurred. Breakfast. He wanted to have breakfast with her. At one of Helsinki's most visible cafes, where business journalists and society photographers lingered over coffee, hoping to spot exactly the kind of meeting that would make headlines. Billionaire CEO seen with mystery woman. This was professional, she told herself. He wanted to discuss her research. That's all. The fact that her heart had started racing the moment she saw his name on her screen meant nothing. The fact that she'd read the message 3 times, analyzing every word choice, every punctuation mark, looking for hidden meaning, that was just anxiety about the acquisition analysis. She should decline. She should suggest a video call instead, something that maintained proper boundaries between a CEO and a mid-level analyst from a regional office. She should absolutely not get back on a train to Helsinki tomorrow morning to have breakfast with a man who'd accidentally seen her changing and then looked at her like she'd rewritten the rules of gravity. Her fingers moved across the phone screen before her brain could intervene. Mr. Vatanen, 8 a.m. works for me. I'll bring the complete analysis. Thank you for the opportunity. She hit send, then immediately wanted to unsend it, rewrite it, add something clever or take back something too eager. But the message was gone, launched into the digital void, and there was no calling it back. 3 minutes later, her phone buzzed again. Please, call me Elias. And come hungry. The cafe makes excellent Karjalan piraka. EV. He'd added a small smile emoji at the end, completely unprofessional, slightly awkward, endearing in a way that made Aino's chest ache. This was a man who negotiated billion-euro deals and addressed thousands at tech conferences, and he was texting her about Karelian pastries with emoji. She saved his number. Told herself it was purely practical. Tried not to notice that her hands had finally stopped shaking. Elias didn't sleep that night. He tried. At midnight, he lay in his king-sized bed in his minimalist penthouse, staring at the ceiling while Helsinki glittered 40 stories below. His mind, usually so disciplined, kept replaying the day in vivid detail, the shock in Aino's eyes, the fire in her voice, the brilliant clarity of her presentation. The moment she'd smiled at him and his entire chest had felt too small for his lungs. At 2 a.m., he gave up on sleep and moved to his home office, opening his laptop with the intention of working. Instead, he found himself searching for information about Aino Lotti. Her employee file was sparse but impressive. Master's degree in data science from Aalto University, thesis on predictive modeling in organizational behavior. 3 years at Vatanen Industries, all spent in the Tampere office doing acquisition analysis. Excellent performance reviews. No disciplinary issues. No personal information beyond an address in Tampere's Tamila district and an emergency contact, Elisa Makinen, listed as friend. He shouldn't be doing this. It was an invasion of privacy, an abuse of power, exactly the kind of behavior that separated ethical leaders from tyrants. But his mouse kept scrolling, hungry for details that would help him understand why this woman had detonated something in his carefully controlled world. There were no social media profiles, unusual for someone her age, but refreshingly private. No photographs except her employee ID, where she looked serious and professional and nothing like the fierce, vulnerable woman he'd encountered in that corridor. Elias closed the laptop, disgusted with himself. This wasn't who he was. He didn't obsess over employees. He didn't lie awake thinking about the curve of someone's spine or the spark in their eyes. He was the ice king of innovation, for God's sake, controlled, calculated, impervious to the messy irrationality of emotion. Except apparently he wasn't. Not anymore. His phone sat on the desk, dark and silent. He wondered if Aino was asleep right now, or if she was also lying awake, replaying the day. Wondered if that moment in the doorway had affected her the way it had affected him, or if he was simply projecting his own inexplicable feelings onto a woman who probably just wanted to forget the whole embarrassing incident. At 4 a.m., he did something he hadn't done in months. He went to the piano in his living room, pulled the cover off the keys, and played. Sibelius first, melancholy and finish and full of the kind of longing he usually refused to acknowledge. Then something simpler, a folk melody his grandmother had taught him as a child, about 2 souls separated by a lake who could see each other but never touch. His fingers found the melody in the darkness, and for the first time in years, Elias allowed himself to feel without analyzing, to want without justifying, to imagine a life that looked different from the one he'd so carefully constructed. When dawn finally broke over Helsinki, grey and reluctant, he was still at the piano, playing the same melody over and over, thinking about green eyes and honey-brown hair and the way the world had tilted in a single heartbeat. What would you do if you met someone who changed everything in an instant? Share your thoughts below. Café Engel occupied a corner building near Senate Square, all Art Nouveau curves and tall windows that flooded the interior with weak morning light. Elias arrived at 7:45, exactly 15 minutes early, his usual practice for important meetings. Except this didn't feel like a meeting. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, about to step off into nothing. He chose a table near the back, away from windows where photographers might lurk, but not so secluded that it seemed deliberately hidden. Professional but private. Casual but intentional. He was overthinking this, he knew, but couldn't seem to stop. The waiter brought coffee without being asked. Elias was a regular here, though usually for lunch meetings with board members or investors. Never breakfast. Never anything that might be mistaken for personal rather than professional. At 7:58, the cafe door opened, and Aino stepped inside. She dressed carefully, Elias could tell, charcoal slacks again, a deep green sweater that matched her eyes, her hair pulled back but softer than yesterday, with a few strands escaping around her face. She carried a leather messenger bag that looked well used, practical, not trying to impress. She scanned the cafe, and when her gaze found him, something flickered across her face. Relief? Anxiety? That same recognition he'd felt yesterday? Elias stood as she approached, a gesture his mother had drilled into him as a child. Aino's eyes widened slightly at the courtesy, and he realized that most men in her professional life probably didn't stand when she entered a room. "Good morning," she said softly, and even those simple words carried the musical lilt of her accent, the slight formality of someone who'd learned English as a second language and spoke it beautifully but carefully. "Good morning, Aino." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming. I know it's a long journey from Tampere." "I left at 6, she admitted, settling into the chair and placing her bag carefully beside her feet. The train was mostly empty. Commuters going the opposite direction. An awkward silence descended, not quite uncomfortable, but charged with everything they weren't saying. Yesterday's incident hung between them like smoke, impossible to ignore but too delicate to address directly. The waiter appeared, breaking the tension. Aino ordered coffee, black, no sugar, and a Karjalan Piraka with egg butter, exactly what Elias had recommended. He ordered the same, suddenly hungry for something he couldn't quite name. "So," Aino began, reaching for her bag, "the acquisition analysis. I brought the complete." "Wait," Elias interrupted, surprising himself. "Before we talk about work, can we address yesterday? Properly, I mean. Not just apologies and moving on, but actually acknowledging what happened." Aino froze, her hand still on her bag. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Elias wondered if he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Then she withdrew her hand and met his gaze directly. "All right," she said. "What do you want to acknowledge?" "That I violated your privacy," Elias said carefully. "That I made you uncomfortable in your workplace. That no matter how accidental it was, you have every right to file a formal complaint, and I want you to know that there would be no retaliation of any kind." Elias. Aino's voice cut through his rehearsed speech. "Stop. You're not going to get sued. You opened a door in your own building without knowing someone was changing inside. It was embarrassing and awkward, but it wasn't assault or harassment. I'm not fragile. I don't need you to treat me like I'm made of glass." The directness of it, the refusal to play victim or leverage the situation, took his breath away. "Okay," he managed. "But I want you to know that that it wasn't." He trailed off, unable to articulate what he actually meant. "I didn't want to see you like that, but having seen you, I can't unsee you. You've become seared into my consciousness, and I don't know what to do with that." "I know," Aino said quietly, and something in her tone suggested she understood what he wasn't saying. "Can I ask you something? Anything? When you looked at me yesterday," she paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "Did you feel it too? That moment when everything just shifted?" Elias's heart stopped. Then started again, double time, pounding against his ribs. She had felt it. He wasn't projecting or imagining or losing his mind. Whatever had happened in that corridor, whatever impossible thing had sparked between them, it had been mutual. "Yes," he breathed. "God, yes. I thought I was going insane. A smile, small, almost shy, curved Aino's lips. I've been trying to convince myself it was just adrenaline. Fear response. Embarrassment creating false intimacy. And I'm a data scientist, she replied. I don't believe in things I can't measure or quantify. Love at first sight is a fairy tale, not a phenomenon. It's dopamine and projection and the human brain's tendency to create narratives around random events. But Elias prompted, because he could hear the unspoken word hanging between them. Aino leaned forward slightly, her green eyes intense. But yesterday, when you walked through that door, I felt like I'd been waiting my entire life for you to arrive. And that terrifies me. The confession hung in the air between them, brave and vulnerable and utterly disarming. Elias wanted to reach across the table, take her hand, close the physical distance that felt suddenly unbearable. But this was a public cafe, and she was his employee, and there were 1,000 reasons why touching her would be inappropriate. It terrifies me too, he admitted. I don't do this. I don't feel like this. My life is structured, controlled, predictable. And then you climbed into my world. I didn't climb, Aino interrupted, a hint of humor breaking through the tension. You walked into my temporary changing room. Elias laughed, a real laugh, startled and genuine. Fair point. But the effect is the same. You've disrupted everything. Good, Aino said, and the word carried weight, intention, possibility. Maybe you needed disrupting. Their breakfast arrived, steam rising from the Kajalan Paraka, egg butter melting into golden puddles. They ate in silence for a few moments, but it was different now, companionable rather than awkward, charged with potential rather than uncertainty. Tell me about yourself, Elias said eventually. Beyond the employee file. The things that don't show up in HR databases. Aino raised an eyebrow. You read my employee file. Last night, he admitted, not bothering to hide it. Couldn't sleep. It was either that or play piano until my neighbors complained. You play piano? Since I was 5. My mother insisted. She said music would save me from becoming too much like my father. All business, no soul. He paused. She was half right. Which half? I learned piano. Still became all business. Aino studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. I don't think that's true. A man who's all business doesn't text about Carolean pastries with emoji. Doesn't spend sleepless nights thinking about accidental encounters. Doesn't invite a junior analyst to breakfast to discuss feelings instead of acquisition strategies. You're not a junior analyst, Elias said. Your research yesterday was exceptional. You saw problems my entire acquisition team missed. Because I wasn't trying to tell you what you wanted to hear, Aino replied. I was trying to tell you the truth. There's a difference. I know, Elias said quietly. Most people in my life have forgotten that difference. Or never knew it to begin with. Something softened in Aino's expression. That sounds lonely. It is. But I'm used to it. Or I thought I was. He met her eyes. Until yesterday. The moment stretched between them, full of things neither of them were quite ready to say. Around them, the cafe buzzed with morning activity. Business people grabbing takeaway coffee, tourists studying maps, ordinary life unfolding in ordinary ways. But at their table, nothing felt ordinary. My turn, Aino said, breaking the silence. Tell me something real. Not CEO Elias Vatanen, not the Ice King of Innovation. Just Elias. One true thing. He didn't hesitate. I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of waking up in an empty apartment and going to sleep in an empty bed and filling the hours between with work because it's the only thing that makes sense. I'm tired of being good at everything except the one thing that actually matters, connecting with another human being. The confession left him breathless, raw. He'd never said those words aloud, hadn't even fully admitted them to himself until they spilled out across the table. But Aino didn't look shocked or pitying. She looked understanding. I moved to Tampere 3 years ago, she said quietly, because I wanted to disappear. Not physically, just emotionally. I wanted to be somewhere small and quiet where I could focus on work and not have to risk getting hurt. I told myself I was being independent, self-sufficient. But really, I was just scared. Scared of wanting things I couldn't control. Scared of the kind of vulnerability that comes with caring about someone. What changed? Elias asked. Nothing. Until yesterday. She smiled, but it was tinged with something like sadness. And now I'm sitting in a cafe in Helsinki, having breakfast with a man I barely know, telling him things I haven't told anyone. It's terrifying. We could stop, Elias offered, even though the thought of it felt like amputation. Go back to discussing the acquisition. Keep this professional. Pretend yesterday was just an embarrassing accident and today is just a business meeting. Aino shook her head slowly. We could. But would you be able to forget? To go back to before? No, Elias admitted. Not even a little bit. Then we have a problem, Aino said, but her eyes were bright, almost challenging. Because I'm your employee. You're my boss's boss's boss. There are power dynamics and ethical considerations and probably a dozen company policies that say this, whatever this is, can't happen. I know. And even if we ignored all of that, we barely know each other. We've had one awkward encounter and one breakfast. This could be infatuation, not connection. A story we're telling ourselves because it's romantic and exciting, not because it's real. I know that too. So what do we do? The question hung in the air, genuine and open. Elias took a breath, feeling like he was standing at the edge of that cliff again, about to step off. We could be sensible. Keep our distance. Let this fade. In a few weeks, you'll go back to Tampere, I'll stay in Helsinki, and this will become an interesting story we don't tell at parties. We could, Aino agreed. That would be the smart choice. Or, Elias continued, his heart hammering, we could acknowledge that something extraordinary happened yesterday. Something that defies logic and probability and every reasonable expectation. And instead of running from it, we could explore it. Carefully. Honestly. See if this feeling is real or just a beautiful accident. Aino set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. When she spoke, her voice was steady but her hands trembled slightly. If we do this, if we explore whatever this is, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if it doesn't work, if this turns out to be infatuation or a mistake, you won't let it affect my career. I've worked too hard to build something I'm proud of. I won't let a relationship, successful or failed, destroy that. The word relationship sent a thrill through Elias's chest, even spoken hypothetically. I promise. Your work stands on its own merit, regardless of anything personal between us. And I'll put that in writing if you want. Aino smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. I trust you. Which is strange, considering we just met yesterday. But I do. So? Elias asked, barely breathing. What do we do? Aino reached across the table, slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted. When her fingers touched his, just a light contact, barely a brush of skin against skin, Elias felt that same electric shock from yesterday, confirmation that whatever existed between them was very, very real. We take this slow, she said. We get to know each other properly. No rushing into anything. No grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Just two people, trying to figure out if what they feel is worth the risk. Elias wrapped his fingers around hers, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. Slow, he agreed. I can do slow. Can you? Aino challenged gently. Because I've read about you, Elias Vatanen. You don't do anything slowly. You're famous for moving fast, taking risks, disrupting entire industries. Maybe I'm ready to be disrupted myself, Elias replied. By a brilliant data scientist from Tampere who isn't afraid to tell me the truth. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined across the table, the rest of the cafe fading into background noise. Outside, Helsinki woke slowly to another grey winter day. But inside Café Engel, something bright and fragile and impossibly hopeful was being born. We should probably look at that acquisition analysis, Aino said eventually, though she didn't pull her hand away. We should, Elias agreed, also not moving. In a minute. In a minute, she echoed, smiling. They ordered more coffee. Discussed the analysis. Debated integration strategies and market positioning and all the professional things that had supposedly brought them together. But underneath every word, every exchanged glance, every careful touch of hands reaching for the same sugar bowl, ran a current of something deeper. By the time they left the cafe 2 hours later, stepping out into the cold Helsinki morning, everything had changed. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Elias Vatanen had no idea what would happen next. He'd never felt more alive. 3 weeks passed like a fever dream. Elias restructured his entire schedule around excuses to be in Tampere: acquisition site visits, regional office reviews, client meetings that could have been handled by subordinates but suddenly required his personal attention. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he found himself on the morning train, watching forests blur past his window, his heart rate climbing with every kilometer that brought him closer to her. They were being careful. Professional. Meeting in conference rooms with glass walls, discussing business strategies and market analytics where anyone could see them. But after the meetings ended, when the offices emptied and the winter darkness pressed against the windows, they would walk together through Tampere's snow-covered streets, talking until their breath formed clouds in the freezing air. Elias learned that Aino grew up in a small town near Oulu, daughter of a schoolteacher and a carpenter. That she'd lost her father to cancer when she was 19 and had spent the next decade trying to make him proud. That she baked terrible cookies but could solve differential equations in her sleep. That she laughed at her own jokes before the punchline. That she cried at sad movies but pretended not to. That she believed in being kind even when kindness wasn't profitable. Aino learned that Elias had built his empire partly to prove his deceased father wrong. The father who'd called him too soft, too sentimental, too much like his mother. That he'd sacrificed relationships, friendships, entire years of his life on the altar of success, and only now was beginning to question whether the sacrifice had been worth it. That he played piano when he couldn't sleep, that he donated anonymously to music programs in Helsinki schools, that beneath the Ice King exterior lived someone who desperately wanted to believe in things that couldn't be quantified or controlled. They didn't kiss. Didn't cross the invisible line they'd drawn between professional and personal. But the tension built like a storm gathering strength, and everyone around them could feel it. "You're different," Julie observed one Friday afternoon as Elias prepared for yet another trip to Tampere. She stood in his office doorway, arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone who'd finally decided to speak uncomfortable truth. Happier. Distracted. Almost human. Elias looked up from his laptop. "I'm not sure whether to be offended or grateful." "Be honest," Julie replied. "It's the analyst from Tampere, isn't it? Aino Lotti." There was no point in denying it. Julie had worked for him long enough to read the signs. "Yes." "Does she know you're falling in love with her?" The question hit like a physical blow. Falling in love. Was that what this was? This constant ache to hear her voice, to see her smile, to listen to her passionate explanations of data architecture and market trends? This feeling that the world had been black and white until she'd walked in and added color? "I don't know," Elias admitted quietly. "We're taking things slowly. Being careful." "Elias," Julie said, her voice gentler now, "I've worked for you for 5 years. I've never seen you careful about anything. You're the man who bet his entire company on a product everyone said would fail. Who acquired 3 competitors in a single year because you saw an opportunity no one else did. Being careful isn't your nature." "Maybe I'm learning." "Or maybe you're scared," Julie suggested. "Because business risks are easy. Worst case, you lose money. But this is your heart. And if it goes wrong, there's no acquisition strategy or market analysis that will fix it." Elias closed his laptop, suddenly unable to focus on work. What if I'm too damaged for this? What if I've spent so long being the Ice King that I've forgotten how to be anything else? "Then she'll teach you," Julie replied simply. "That's what love does. It teaches us how to be human again." She moved to leave, then paused at the door. "But Elias? Eventually, you're going to have to stop being careful. You're going to have to risk everything. The only question is whether you'll do it before you lose her." After Julie left, Elias sat in his office as Helsinki darkened beyond the windows, thinking about risk and reward, about the difference between what was safe and what was worth it. His phone sat on the desk, silent. He picked it up, pulled up Aino's contact, and typed a message before he could overthink it. "Tomorrow is Saturday. No work, no excuses, no careful boundaries. Just you and me. Will you let me take you somewhere? Trust me with a day of your life?" He hit send, then immediately panicked. Too much. Too forward. He was moving too fast, pushing too hard, exactly what they'd agreed not to do. Her response came within minutes, I'll trust you with a day. But only if you promise to stop calling yourself E in texts. Your name is beautiful. Use it. Aino. Elias smiled at his phone like a teenager, warmth spreading through his chest. Deal. I'll pick you up at 9 a.m. Dress warm. Elias. Better. See you tomorrow. I'm nervous. Me too. Terrified, actually. Elias. Good. That means it matters. Saturday dawned clear and brutally cold, the kind of February morning where the sun sparkled on snow and the air felt sharp enough to cut. Elias drove to Tampere in his personal car, not the company sedan with its tinted windows and corporate sterility, but the vintage Volvo he'd inherited from his grandfather, dark blue and reliable and unpretentious. Aino lived in a modest apartment building in Tammela, nothing like the luxury condos that dotted Helsinki's waterfront. When she emerged from the entrance at exactly 9 a.m., Elias's breath caught. She dressed in layers, jeans tucked into winter boots, a thick sweater the color of cranberries, a wool coat that looked handmade. Her hair was loose for once, falling past her shoulders in honey-brown waves, and she wore a knit hat with a small pom-pom that should have looked ridiculous but instead looked adorable. She spotted the Volvo and grinned, climbing into the passenger seat with a kind of easy grace that made his heart stutter. This is your car? I was expecting something sleeker. More billionaire appropriate. Disappointed. Elias asked as she buckled her seatbelt. Relieved, Aino replied. It means you might actually be a real person under all that corporate polish. I'm real, Elias assured her, pulling away from the curb. Terrifyingly real. Especially around you. They drove north through Finland's winter landscape, following roads that wound between frozen lakes and pine forests heavy with snow. Elias had prepared a playlist, Sibelius and Vartina and contemporary Finnish musicians, instrumental pieces that filled the car without demanding conversation. Aino watched the countryside pass, occasionally humming along to melodies she recognized, comfortable with silence in a way most people weren't. After an hour, she finally asked, "Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere I haven't been in 15 years, Elias replied. "Somewhere I need to share with you, if this," he gestured between them, "is going to be real." Aino studied his profile. "That sounds serious." "It is," he admitted. "My mother would say I'm finally letting someone see the parts of me I usually keep locked away." Should I be honored or concerned? Both, probably. They drove another hour, the landscape growing more remote, until Elias turned down a narrow road marked only by a weathered wooden sign, Vatanen Perhetila. Vatanen Family Farm. Aino's eyes widened. "This is where you grew up." "Until I was 10, Elias said. "Before my father decided farming was for peasants and moved us to Helsinki so he could build his business empire. He sold this place to my uncle, and when my uncle died, it passed to my mother. She lives here now, tends the land, keeps bees, does everything my father hated." The road ended at a classic Finnish farmhouse, red with white trim, smoke curling from its chimney. Gardens slept under snow, and a barn stood nearby, probably sheltering chickens or maybe a goat. It was rustic and simple and so far removed from Elias's penthouse life that they might as well have traveled to another planet. "Elias," Aino said softly, "you brought me to meet your mother." "I told her I was coming," Elias replied, suddenly nervous. "But I didn't mention you. I needed to show you where I come from. Who I was before I became the Ice King. And my mother, she's the only person who remembers that boy. The one who played piano and helped with the chickens and believed in magic." Before Aino could respond, the farmhouse door opened, and a woman emerged, small, sturdy, wrapped in a thick shawl, her grey hair pulled back in a practical bun. She spotted the Volvo and waved, her face breaking into a smile that transformed her weathered features. "Elias," she called in Finnish. "You actually came. And you brought," she stopped as they exited the car, her eyes going wide. "You brought a girl." "Iti," Elias said, reverting to Finnish as well, "This is Aino Lotti. Aino, this is my mother, Hilka Vatanen." Hilka approached slowly, studying Aino with the kind of intense scrutiny only Finnish mothers could pull off. Then, without warning, she pulled Aino into a fierce hug. "Finally," she murmured. "Finally, my son remembers he has a heart." Inside the farmhouse, everything was warmth and wood smoke and the smell of fresh bread. Hilka bustled around the kitchen, insisting they sit at the worn wooden table while she prepared coffee and pulled puller from the oven, cardamom-scented Finnish sweet bread that made Aino moan with pleasure on the first bite. "This is incredible," Aino said in Finnish, and Hilka beamed. "My grandmother's recipe," Hilka replied. Elias's father hated it. Said it was too provincial, too old-fashioned. But some things shouldn't change just because the world around them does. Elias sat quietly, watching the two women interact, his mother's bluntness meeting Aino's directness, both of them speaking with a kind of unfiltered honesty that most people spent their lives avoiding. They talked about Tampere and Lapland, about data science and beekeeping, about the weather and politics and the strange ways life surprised you. After coffee, Hilka insisted on showing Aino the farm, the sleeping gardens, the chicken coop, the barn where she kept supplies and old furniture and boxes of Elias's childhood things. Elias followed at a distance, watching Aino laugh at the chicken's antics, watching her help his mother scatter feed with casual competence. "She's beautiful," Hilka said quietly in Finnish as they walked back toward the house. "But you knew that." "It's not about that," Elias replied. "It's something else." "She challenges you," Hilka observed. "Doesn't let you hide behind your success. Your father would have hated her." "Good," Elias said. Hilka stopped walking, turning to face her son directly. "Are you in love with her?" The question hung in the cold air. Elias looked toward the house, where Aino stood on the porch, brushing snow from her boots, completely at ease in this simple place. She caught him looking and smiled, warm, genuine, seeing him not as the billionaire CEO but as Elias, the boy who'd grown up here, who'd played in these fields and helped his mother bake bread and believed the world was full of wonder. "Yes," Elias breathed. "God help me, yes." "Then you need to tell her," Hilka said. "Not tomorrow or next week. Today. Now. Because that girl is brave enough to love you back, but only if you're brave enough to ask." They left the farmhouse as afternoon shadows stretched across the snow. Aino was quiet in the passenger seat, processing the day, and Elias didn't push conversation. He drove south for 20 minutes, then pulled off at a scenic overlook he remembered from childhood, a place where the road climbed high enough to see across kilometers of frozen lake and forest. He parked, and they both got out, standing at the overlook's railing while wind whipped around them and the sun began its early winter descent. Finland spread before them in shades of white and grey and deep green, beautiful and harsh and utterly unforgiving. "Thank you," Aino said finally. "For today. For trusting me with this." "I needed you to understand," Elias replied. "That I'm not just the person you see in Helsinki. That I come from somewhere real, somewhere grounded. And that part of me, the part my father tried to kill and my mother kept alive, that's the part that recognized you. In that corridor, in that impossible moment. That's the part that's been waiting for you." Aino turned to face him, her eyes bright in the fading light. "Elias. I know we agreed to go slow," he continued, the words tumbling out now, impossible to stop. "I know we've only known each other 3 weeks. I know this violates every reasonable expectation about how relationships should develop. But Aino, I can't pretend anymore. I can't be careful or measured or sensible." He took her hands, feeling her fingers cold inside his warm ones. "I think I'm falling in love with you. No, I know I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I fell that first moment, when you looked at me with those green eyes and demanded I leave your space. Maybe it happened over breakfast at Café Engel. Maybe it's been happening slowly every time you challenged my assumptions or laughed at your own jokes or showed me what it means to be honest and brave and absolutely yourself." Tears tracked down Aino's cheeks, freezing in the cold air. "You can't know that. It's too soon. We barely." "I know what I feel," Elias interrupted gently. "And I know it's terrifying. I know it makes no sense. I know that by every logical measure, we should slow down, be reasonable, protect ourselves. But Aino, I've spent my entire life being reasonable. I've calculated every risk, controlled every variable, built walls so high that nothing could hurt me. And you walked through those walls like they were made of smoke." "I'm scared," Aino whispered. "What if this is just infatuation? What if the intensity fades and we're left with nothing?" "Then we'll have tried," Elias replied. "We'll have been brave enough to reach for something extraordinary instead of settling for something safe. Isn't that better than spending the rest of our lives wondering what might have been?" Aino closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they held determination alongside the fear. "I need to tell you something. Something I haven't told anyone. Okay. She took a shaky breath. 5 years ago, I was engaged. To a man I thought I loved, who I thought loved me. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found out he'd been cheating for months. And when I confronted him, he said, her voice broke slightly, he said I was too intense. Too ambitious. That I made him feel small. That I needed to be less, me. Elias felt rage surge through his chest, but he kept his voice gentle. He was an idiot. Maybe, Aino agreed. But it broke something in me. Made me believe that who I am, the intensity, the ambition, the way I feel things deeply, that it's too much. That I need to be smaller, quieter, more palatable for someone to love me. Aino. Let me finish, she said. When you walked through that door 3 weeks ago, when you looked at me like I mattered, like I was extraordinary instead of too much, she stopped, collecting herself. I wanted to believe it was real. But I was terrified that you'd eventually realize what he did. That I'm exhausting. That loving me is too hard. Elias cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. You're not too much. You're exactly right. Your intensity is what makes you brilliant. Your ambition is what makes you remarkable. The way you feel deeply, challenge constantly, refuse to compromise who you are, that's not something to fix or hide. That's what makes you Aino. And Aino is who I'm falling in love with. You mean that? She whispered. With every part of me. The boy who grew up on that farm and the man who built an empire, both of them recognize you as someone extraordinary. Someone worth every risk. What's the bravest thing you've ever done for love? Share your story in the comments. Aino made a sound between a laugh and a sob. This is insane. We're standing on a frozen overlook in the middle of nowhere, confessing feelings that should take months to develop. Years, probably, Elias agreed. If we were being sensible. We're terrible at being sensible. Absolutely terrible. So what do we do? Aino asked, but she was smiling now through her tears. Elias smiled back, feeling lighter than he had in years. We stop being careful. We stop pretending this is anything other than what it is. We take the risk. Together. Together. Aino stepped closer, closing the distance between them until they stood chest to chest, breath mingling in the cold air. I think I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. I've been trying not to. Trying to be logical and protective and smart. But when you brought me to meet your mother, when you trusted me with your past, she shook her head. I'm done being scared. I'm done hiding. So we do this? Elias asked. For real? All the complications and risks and impossibilities. For real, Aino confirmed. They stood like that for a long moment, the winter wind howling around them, the sun painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Then, with the kind of inevitability that felt like gravity or fate or whatever force pulls souls together, Elias leaned down and Aino rose up, and their lips met. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them afraid to rush or push too hard. But then Aino's arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer, and Elias's hand slid into her hair, and suddenly there was nothing tentative about it. It was heat and hunger and 3 weeks of careful restraint shattering into something wild and desperate and absolutely right. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Aino laughed, a sound of pure joy. So much for taking things slow. Slow is overrated, Elias replied, pressing his forehead against hers. Turns out I'm much better at jumping off cliffs. Just promise me something, Aino said seriously. Anything. Promise me that when we're back in Helsinki, when the real world intrudes with all its complications and power dynamics and corporate politics, promise me you won't regret this. That you won't wake up one morning and wish you'd been more reasonable. Elias pulled back enough to look into her eyes. I promise I will never regret choosing you. Not today, not tomorrow, not when things get difficult. You're the most unreasonable, illogical, perfect decision I've ever made. Aino grinned. That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Get used to it, Elias replied. I have 15 years of frozen emotions to thaw out. I'm going to be insufferably romantic. Good, Aino said, kissing him again, softer this time. I'm counting on it. They stood at that overlook until the sun set completely, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about everything and nothing, about how they'd handle the professional complications, about what they wanted for the future, about the difference between falling in love and choosing love every day. When they finally drove back toward Tampere, hands linked across the center console, the car filled with a comfortable silence that felt more intimate than words. Elias couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this way, unguarded, hopeful, terrifyingly vulnerable, and completely certain at the same time. He was in love. Actually, impossibly, irrevocably in love. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, he had no idea how the story would end. He couldn't wait to find out. Monday morning arrived with the weight of reality. Elias sat in his Helsinki office, staring at the email draft on his screen. 3 lines, carefully worded, potentially career-ending. Effective immediately, Aino Lotti will be transferred from regional analysis to a direct reporting position within corporate strategy, reporting to CFO Mikko Jovanen rather than through my office. This reorganization reflects her exceptional analytical capabilities and removes any potential conflicts of interest. His finger hovered over the send button. This was the right thing to do, the ethical thing. If he and Aino were going to build something real, they couldn't do it with a power imbalance hanging over them like a sword. She needed to be positioned where their relationship couldn't be misconstrued as favoritism or exploitation. But sending this email would make their relationship public. The entire company would know, or at least suspect, why the CEO had suddenly reorganized to remove a junior analyst from his reporting chain. The speculation would be immediate and brutal. His phone buzzed. Aino, stop overthinking. Send the email. We knew this would be complicated. Despite his anxiety, Elias smiled. She always seemed to know what he was thinking, even from 180 kilometers away in Tampere. How did you know I was drafting an email? He typed back. Because I know you. You're probably sitting in your office at 7 a.m., having already run 5 scenarios about how to handle the professional complications. Send it. Let people talk. We have nothing to hide. What if it damages your reputation? What if people think you slept your way into a promotion? Then I'll prove them wrong by being exceptional at my job. Stop trying to protect me from consequences I've already accepted. I'm brave enough for both of us if you're not. The gentle challenge in her words made him laugh. She was right. Of course. They'd agreed to take the risk together. That meant facing the complications head-on, not trying to hide or minimize or pretend the relationship didn't exist. Elias hit send. Within an hour, his office phone started ringing. Within 2 hours, the gossip network had spread the news through every department. By lunch, Business Insider had published a speculative piece, Ice King thaws? Sources say Vatanen CEO restructures to date employee. Julie brought him coffee at 2 p.m., her expression carefully neutral. The board wants a meeting. Tomorrow morning. They're concerned about optics. Of course they are, Elias replied. Tell them I'll be there. And Julie? Thank you. For not judging. I'm not judging, she said softly. I'm relieved. You've been half alive for 5 years. If this woman brings you back to life, then deal with whatever the board throws at you. Just don't let them make you choose between love and the company. After she left, Elias sat alone with his coffee and thought about choices. About his father, who'd chosen business over family and died alone and bitter. About his mother, who'd chosen authenticity over wealth and now lived peacefully on a farm, tending bees and baking bread. About what kind of man he wanted to be. His phone rang. Aino's name on the screen made his heart leap. Hi, he said, unable to keep the smile out of his voice. Hi yourself. She sounded nervous. So, we're officially Helsinki's scandal of the week. Does it bother you? Honestly, a little. I had 3 colleagues in Tampere ask me today if it was true, if I was dating you. And I didn't know what to say because we haven't actually defined what this is. Are we dating? Are we in a relationship? What do we call this? Elias leaned back in his chair, watching snow begin to fall outside his window. What do you want to call it? I want. Aino paused, then continued with that characteristic directness he loved. I want to call you my boyfriend. I want to tell people that yes, I'm seeing Elias Vatanen, and yes, it's complicated, but it's also real and chosen and worth fighting for. But I don't want to assume that's what you want too. Aino, Elias said softly, I would be honored to be your boyfriend. Honored and terrified and completely certain. Yeah. Yeah. Also, I have a board meeting tomorrow where I'll probably have to defend our relationship and my decision-making and possibly my entire fitness to lead this company. So that should be fun. Aino was quiet for a moment. Elias, if this becomes too complicated, if keeping me means losing what you've built. Stop, he interrupted. I'm not choosing between you and the company. I'm choosing both. And if the board can't accept that their CEO is capable of maintaining ethical boundaries while also having a personal life, then maybe I'm leading the wrong company. That's very brave, Aino said. Possibly reckless. But brave. I learned it from you. They talked for another hour, about her day, his meetings, the absurdity of gossip, the strange new reality they were navigating together. When they finally hung up, Elias felt anchored in a way he hadn't before. Whatever storms were coming, they would face them together. The board meeting was exactly as brutal as Elias had anticipated. 9 faces around the polished conference table, most of them skeptical, a few openly hostile. Pekka Loksonen, the chairman and his father's oldest friend, led the inquisition. Explain to me, Elias, how this doesn't represent a catastrophic lapse in judgment, Pekka began, his voice sharp. You've restructured corporate reporting to accommodate a personal relationship with a subordinate. The optics are terrible. The legal exposure is significant. And frankly, it makes you look weak. Weak. Elias repeated calmly. Because I followed proper protocol to remove a conflict of interest. Weak because you couldn't keep your personal life separate from business, Pekka shot back. Your father built this company by understanding that emotions have no place in corporate leadership. You're undermining everything he stood for. Something inside Elias snapped, not with anger, but with sudden, crystalline clarity. Good, he said. My father died alone in this building at 59, having sacrificed every relationship he ever had on the altar of success. He was brilliant and ruthless and completely miserable. If following his example means ending up like him, then I'll gladly undermine everything he stood for. The room went silent. Elias stood, walking to the window, then turned to face the board. I'm in love with Aino Lottie. That's not a scandal or a weakness, it's the best thing that's happened to me in 15 years. And yes, it's complicated because she works for this company. Which is exactly why I restructured reporting to remove any power imbalance. I haven't violated any policies. I haven't shown her favoritism. In fact, I've made her job harder by putting her under Mikko's scrutiny instead of mine. But the perception, one board member began. The perception will be whatever we make it, Elias interrupted. We can frame this as a scandal, or we can frame it as a CEO who takes ethics seriously enough to proactively manage conflicts of interest. We can feed the gossip, or we can demonstrate that successful people are allowed to have personal lives without it compromising their professional judgment. Pekka leaned back in his chair, studying Elias with shrewd eyes. You've changed. 3 months ago, you would have calculated the risk and walked away from anything that threatened the company's image. 3 months ago, I was slowly dying of loneliness and calling it success, Elias replied. Aino didn't just walk into my life. She saved it. And I'm not apologizing for choosing to live. Even if it costs you this company, another board member challenged. Elias met each of their gazes in turn. I hope it doesn't come to that. I've given 15 years to building Vatanen Industries into what it is today. But if you're asking me to choose between this company and the woman I love, if you're telling me that being a good CEO means being a terrible human being, then yes. I'll choose her. Every time. The room erupted in argument, some board members defending him, others calling for his resignation, Pekka trying to restore order. But Elias felt strangely calm. He'd laid his cards on the table. The outcome was no longer in his control. After 2 hours of debate, Pekka finally called for a vote. Confidence in Elias's continued leadership, yes or no. The vote was 6-3 in his favor. You're on thin ice, Elias, Pekka said as the meeting adjourned. The board is willing to give you the benefit of the doubt for now. But if this relationship becomes a distraction, if it impacts your performance or the company's reputation negatively, we'll revisit this conversation. Understood, Elias replied. Thank you for your confidence. As the board members filed out, Pekka lingered. Your father would have been furious about this, he said quietly. I know. But I think he would also have been envious. Pekka's weathered face softened. He used to talk about your mother, in the early days. before things went bad between them. He'd say she was the only person who'd ever made him feel alive. And then he convinced himself that being alive was a weakness. Don't make his mistake, Elias. If you found someone who makes you feel alive, hold on to her. The company will survive. Loneliness won't. After Pekka left, Elias stood alone in the conference room, hands shaking with adrenaline and relief. He'd gambled everything, his reputation, his company, his carefully constructed image, on a relationship that was barely a month old. And somehow, impossibly, he'd won. He pulled out his phone and called Aino. She answered on the first ring. "Well," she asked breathlessly. "I still have a job," Elias replied. "And more importantly, I still have you." "You were never going to lose me," Aino said softly. "Not over a board meeting. Not over gossip. Not over anything we can face together." "I love you," Elias said, the words tumbling out naturally now, no longer terrifying. "I know we haven't said it officially. I know it's fast. But I love you, Aino. Completely." "I love you too," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "So much it scares me. But I'm done being scared." "Good," Elias said. "Because I have a question to ask you, and I need you to not be scared when I ask it." "Okay. Move to Helsinki. Move in with me. I know it soon. I know it violates every reasonable timeline for relationship progression. But I don't want to spend the next year doing the long-distance dance. I don't want to only see you on weekends or business trips. I want to wake up with you. Fall asleep with you. Build a life that's ours, not just stolen moments between our separate existences." Aino was quiet for so long that Elias wondered if the call had dropped. Then, "My lease in Tampere ends next month. Is that a yes?" "That's a, I was already thinking about it and now you've made it impossible to say no." He could hear the smile in her voice. "Yes, Elias. I'll move to Helsinki. I'll move in with you. Let's be completely unreasonable together." 3 months later. Spring came to Finland like a revelation. Sudden, bright, transforming the frozen landscape into something green and growing and full of impossible hope. Aino stood in the kitchen of Elias's penthouse, their penthouse now, watching sunrise paint Helsinki's harbour in shades of gold and rose. She'd moved in 6 weeks ago, bringing her books and terrible cookie recipes and a bright, chaotic energy that had transformed the minimalist space into something that actually felt like home. The piano in the corner was no longer gathering dust. Elias played most evenings now, teaching Aino simple melodies while she laughed at her own lack of coordination. The refrigerator held actual food instead of takeout containers. The bedroom had curtains now, warm, heavy ones that blocked out the midnight sun and created a cave of intimacy. They'd faced the complications together, the gossip that had gradually faded as people found new scandals to discuss. The professional challenges of maintaining boundaries when they both worked for the same company. The learning curve of cohabitation, discovering that Elias was obsessively neat while Aino left books in piles and coffee cups on random surfaces. But they'd also discovered the joy of ordinary domesticity, grocery shopping on Saturdays, cooking dinner together on weeknights, walking through Helsinki's parks as spring flowers bloomed, existing in companionable silence while working on their respective laptops. Aino heard footsteps behind her. Elias, drawn from sleep by the sound of her moving around. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing a kiss to her neck. "Couldn't sleep," he murmured. "Too beautiful outside," Aino replied, leaning back against him. "And I was thinking about how 3 months ago, I was terrified. Convinced that this intensity couldn't last, that the infatuation would fade and we'd be left with nothing. But it hasn't faded, Elias. It's deepened. Gotten richer and more complex and more real." Elias turned her to face him, his ash-blonde hair sleep-tousled, his eyes soft in the morning light. "I told you. You're not too much. You're exactly right." "I know that now," Aino said. "You've taught me that. And I hope I've taught you something too." "What's that?" "That success without connection is just expensive loneliness. That being vulnerable isn't weak, it's brave. That the best things in life are the ones you can't control or quantify or put in a quarterly report." Elias smiled, that genuine smile that still made her heart stutter. "You've taught me all that and more. You've taught me how to be human again." They stood like that as Helsinki woke around them, the city that had witnessed their unlikely beginning, their complicated middle, their ongoing, imperfect, beautiful reality. "I have something for you," Elias said suddenly, pulling away. He disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a small box, not jewelry-sized, something else. "I wanted to wait for the right moment, and this feels right." Aino opened the box to find a key, old, brass, attached to a simple leather cord. "What is this?" "A key to the farmhouse in Rovaniemi," Elias explained. "My mother wanted you to have it. She says the farm belongs to people who understand what matters, and you're one of those people now. Your family." Tears pricked Aino's eyes. "Elias." "I'm not proposing," he said quickly. "Not yet. I know we agreed to take our time with major decisions. But I want you to know that when I think about the future, about where we're heading, I see that farm. I see us there on weekends, teaching our kids how to collect eggs and bake pulla. I see us growing old together, tending bees and playing piano and still challenging each other the way we do now." "Kids," Aino repeated, smiling through tears. "You're thinking about kids. Eventually. Maybe. If you want them." Elias looked suddenly uncertain. "Is that too much? Too fast?" "No," Aino said firmly. "It's exactly right. Because I see that future too. And it terrifies me and thrills me and feels more real than anything I've ever imagined." She kissed him then, long and slow and full of promise. Outside, Helsinki sparkled in spring sunshine. Inside, two people who'd collided in the most unlikely way possible held each other and dreamed of futures they were building together. What does true love mean to you? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. 6 months later at midsummer. The farm in Rovaniemi glowed with midnight sun, the light strange and beautiful and uniquely Finnish. Hilka had insisted on hosting a traditional midsummer celebration, and the farmhouse overflowed with family and friends, Aino's mother from Oulu, Elias's cousins from across Finland, colleagues who become friends, people who'd witnessed their journey and supported them through complications and gossip and all the ordinary challenges of building something extraordinary. Aino stood in the garden, watching Elias help his young cousin start the koko, the traditional midsummer bonfire. He looked different than he had 9 months ago in that Helsinki conference room. More relaxed, quicker to laugh, at ease in his own skin. The Ice King had melted, and in his place stood someone warm and human and utterly content. "You did that," Hilka said, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of Sima, the traditional midsummer mead. "You thawed my son's frozen heart." "He did most of the work himself," Aino replied, accepting the glass. "I just showed him it was safe to try." "That's love," Hilka said wisely. "Not changing someone, but creating space for them to become who they were always meant to be." As the bonfire blazed to life, everyone gathered around, friends and family, children and elders, the collected witnesses to their story. Elias found Aino in the crowd, and his eyes lit up the way they always did when he saw her, as if she was the most remarkable thing in any room. He pulled her aside as the singing started, traditional Finnish songs that had been sung at midsummer for centuries. They walked away from the firelight, into the soft darkness that wasn't really darkness, until they stood alone on the hill overlooking the farm. "Aino Lotti," Elias said formally, then stopped. "Actually, no. I've been rehearsing this speech for weeks, trying to find the perfect words. But that's not us. We're not perfect or polished or carefully planned." "No," Aino agreed, her heart already racing because she knew, somehow she knew, what was coming. "We're accidental and unexpected and completely illogical," Elias continued. "We met in the most ridiculous way possible. We fell in love too fast. We ignored every reasonable piece of advice about taking things slow. And somehow, impossibly, we built something real." He dropped to one knee, and Aino's breath caught. "I don't have a speech," Elias said. "I just have truth. I love you. I love your intensity and your ambition and the way you refuse to be anything less than completely yourself. I love that you challenge me and inspire me and make me want to be better than I am. I love building a life with you, the ordinary moments and the extraordinary ones. And I want to keep building that life, for as long as you'll have me." He pulled out a ring, simple, elegant, a single stone that caught the midnight light. "Marry me, Aino. Not because it's logical or expected or the next step on some relationship timeline. Marry me because I can't imagine my life without you. Because you're my home. Because 9 months ago, I accidentally walked through a door and found everything I'd been missing." Aino was crying now, happy tears streaming down her face. That's actually a very good speech. Is that a yes? Elias asked, smiling despite his obvious nerves. That's a yes, Ano confirmed. Yes to marriage and family and building a life together. Yes to ordinary domesticity and extraordinary adventures. Yes to being completely unreasonable and utterly certain. Yes to you, Elias. Always yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, like everything about them, and stood, pulling her into his arms. They kissed as the midsummer sun hung suspended on the horizon, as their friends and family celebrated by the bonfire, as Finland spread around them in all its strange, beautiful glory. I love you, Elias whispered against her lips. I love you too, Ano replied. Even though you have terrible timing. Now we have to go back down there and tell everyone, and your mother is going to cry, and this whole evening is going to turn into an engagement party. Would you rather I'd waited? Not even a little bit. She kissed him again, deeper this time. This is perfect. You're perfect. We're perfect. We're a mess, Elias corrected, laughing. A perfect mess, Ano agreed. They walked back down the hill hand in hand, toward the firelight and celebration, toward the family that had gathered to witness their joy. When Hilka saw the ring on Ano's finger, she burst into tears exactly as predicted, pulling them both into fierce hugs and declaring this the best midsummer in 40 years. The celebration lasted until dawn, or what would have been dawn if the sun ever actually set this far north in summer. They danced traditional Finnish dances and modern ones, ate too much food, drank too much Sima, laughed until their cheeks hurt and their hearts felt too full to contain everything they felt. At some point, Ano's mother pulled her aside, studying her with the penetrating gaze only mothers possess. You're happy, she observed. Really, truly happy. I am, Ano confirmed. I know it seems fast. I know people probably think we're crazy. Let them think what they want, her mother interrupted. I watched you for 5 years after that boy broke your heart, watched you convince yourself that work was enough, that being alone was safer than being vulnerable. And now look at you. You're glowing. You're alive. If that's crazy, then crazy is exactly what you needed. Later, as the celebration finally wound down and guests began drifting towards sleep, Elias and Ano found themselves alone again on the farmhouse porch. The midnight sun had finally relented, dipping below the horizon for a brief hour before it would rise again. 9 months ago, Ano said quietly, I was terrified of this. Of feeling this much. Of risking this deeply. And now? Elias asked. Now I'm still terrified, she admitted. Because I love you so much that losing you would break me. But I'm also more certain than I've ever been about anything. You're worth the risk. We're worth the risk. We're going to have a life together, Elias said wonderingly. Marriage and maybe kids and definitely that piano in the corner of the living room. Growing old on this farm. Arguing about whose turn it is to collect eggs. Fighting about your obsessive neatness and my chaotic book piles, Ano added. Supporting each other through career challenges and personal struggles, Elias continued. Loving each other even when it's hard, Ano finished. Especially when it's hard. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the brief Finnish darkness give way to dawn. Somewhere in the farmhouse, Hilka was probably already awake, preparing coffee and planning the wedding she'd been dreaming of since the day Elias first brought Ano home. Thank you, Elias said suddenly. For what? For climbing into my cart at that terrible mall, he said, then laughed at Ano's confused expression. Sorry, wrong metaphor. For being in that conference room when I walked in. For yelling at me when you had every right to. For being brave enough to let me see you, really see you. For teaching me that the best things in life are the ones you can't plan or control. You're welcome, Ano said softly. And thank you for seeing me. For proving that someone could love me exactly as I am, intensity and ambition and all. For showing me that vulnerability isn't weakness. We're going to be insufferably happy, aren't we? Elias mused. Disgustingly so, Ano agreed. The kind of couple that makes other people roll their eyes. Good, Elias said, pulling her closer. I've spent enough of my life being the Ice King. Time to be the embarrassingly in love king instead. Ano laughed, the sound bright and free and full of joy. I love you, Elias Vatanen. I love you, Ano Lotti. Soon to be Ano Vatanen, if you want. I'll think about it, she teased. Maybe Aino Lotivatanen. Keep my own name but add yours too. Perfect, Elias said. Just like you. 1 year later. The wedding was small, intimate, held on the farm in late August when the days were still warm but hints of autumn colored the leaves. They'd kept it simple, close family and friends, traditional Finnish elements mixed with personal touches, a celebration focused on joy rather than spectacle. Aino wore a dress the color of cream, simple and elegant, with wildflowers in her hair. Elias wore a classic suit, midnight blue like always, but his eyes were warm when he watched her walk toward him through Hilka's garden. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about choosing each other daily, about being brave enough to stay vulnerable, about building a life that honored both their ambitions and their love. When the officiant finally pronounced them married, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers, and Elias kissed his wife with such obvious joy that several people cried. During the reception, as traditional Finnish music played and guests danced in the fading summer light, Tuuli approached Aino with a knowing smile. "I have a confession," she said.
"Oh?"
Aino asked, slightly suspicious. "That day, the day Elias walked in on you changing, it wasn't an accident that you were in that conference room." Aino's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "The bathroom on that floor wasn't actually being renovated," Tuuli admitted. "I told you it was because I wanted you to have privacy to change. But the real reason was that conference room B has terrible soundproofing, and I knew Elias would be walking by at exactly 3 o'clock because he's pathologically punctual. I hoped that maybe putting you two in the same space, creating an unguarded moment, might crack through the walls he'd built." "You set us up?" Aino asked incredulously. "I gave you an opportunity," Tuuli corrected. "What you did with it was entirely your choice. But yes, I may have played matchmaker. Elias needed disrupting, and you looked like exactly the kind of chaos he needed." Aino should have been angry, but instead she found herself laughing. "That's actually kind of brilliant." "I know," Tuuli said smugly. "You're welcome, by the way. I expect to be godmother to your first child." Later, as the celebration wound down and guests began leaving, Elias found Aino by the garden fence, looking out over the farm that was now officially theirs. Hilka had signed it over as a wedding gift, saying it belonged to the next generation. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Impossibly happy," Aino confirmed. "How did we get so lucky?" "I don't think it was luck," Elias replied. "I think it was courage. We were both brave enough to risk everything for something real." "Best risk I ever took," Aino said. "Second best," Elias corrected. "The best risk you took was yelling at me in that corridor. If you'd been intimidated or deferential or tried to use the situation to your advantage, we wouldn't be here." "True," Aino acknowledged. "So really, this whole marriage is built on me calling you rude." "Exactly how it should be," Elias said, laughing. "Set the tone early. I'm fallible, you're fierce, and we're going to challenge each other forever." As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, real darkness finally, not the endless summer light, Aino turned in her husband's arms and kissed him softly. "Forever sounds perfect," she whispered. "Forever sounds like just the beginning," Elias replied. And there, on the farm where he'd grown up learning about magic and possibility, where he'd brought the woman who'd changed everything, where they would raise their own children and teach them about being brave and vulnerable and authentically themselves, there, Elias Vatanen held his wife and felt completely, impossibly, perfectly home. The accidental moment in a Helsinki conference room had led them here, to chosen love, to deliberate commitment, to a life built on courage and honesty and the willingness to risk everything for something extraordinary. It had been the luckiest accident of their lives. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin in the most unexpected ways: a wrong door, a vulnerable moment, a heartbeat where two souls recognize each other across the space between them. Aino and Elias's journey reminds us that real love requires courage, the courage to be vulnerable, to challenge each other, to choose connection over safety. Their story asks us, are we brave enough to risk our carefully constructed walls for something authentic? Are we willing to be seen, truly seen, in all our intensity and ambition and imperfect humanity? And when we find someone who sees us and loves us anyway, are we courageous enough to hold on? We'd love to hear from you. What moment in your life changed everything? When did you last take a risk that terrified you but proved to be worth it? Share your stories in the comments below. Your courage might inspire someone else to take their own leap of faith. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that the best things in life are worth the risk. Love is always worth the risk. Thanks for watching till the end. We know you loved this story, and there are many more thrilling ones waiting for you. Just click on the video on your screen to dive into the next chapter.